Hello, everybody. Wow, I can see everybody pouring in. We're all already up to nearly 100 participants, which is amazing to see. Welcome, everybody. For you, those of you who don't know me, my name's Claire Farrow. I'm the Global Head of Content for Make a Difference Media. And I also oversee the content for our annual Mad World Summit and for the Water Cooler event, which is coming up in April. We've had a fantastic response to this webinar, which is focused on how to meet increasing demand for personalised, inclusive workplace wellbeing support. We've had over 700 people registering, so that's wonderful to see so much interest in this topic. Whilst we're waiting for the last few attendees to join, we've got a poll to run past you, and it's an anonymous poll, so please feel free to share your opinion. It really helps us to kind of understand where you're coming from, and then hopefully we can adapt the discussion as we go along to take that into account. So the first question, hopefully you can all see that on your screens. Where do your employees work? So if you just put kind of one choice here: office-based, working from home, hybrid working, based on site, factory or distribution centre or other. And then the second question is, are you finding increased demand for personalised wellbeing support? Yes, no, or not sure. We certainly think that there is increasing demand for personalised wellbeing support, so it'll be interesting to see if you agree with that. People are kind of feeding back to us that the kind of one-size-fits-all approach doesn't really necessarily work. It doesn't deliver the kind of the results that they're looking for. And so it's the trick is, how do you offer personalised support that meets everybody's needs? And that's what we're going to be discussing today, really. Okay, Laura, let's see the results, please. Okay, so we've got most people hybrid working. That's interesting to see. And based on site, not many from factory distribution centre. But not surprisingly, most people are hybrid working, which is interesting to see. And I kind of get some feedback from the speakers on that when we move on to the discussion. And are you finding increased demand for personalised wellbeing support? Yes. 72% of people are saying yes, 8% no, and 20% not sure. So that's interesting, and I guess you probably wouldn't be joining this webinar if you weren't finding there was increased demand, although a few of you aren't. So it'd be interesting to get your views on that as well. So before we move on to introducing the panel members, I just wanted to remind anybody that hasn't joined our webinars before that we do like them to be as interactive as possible. You can't join with your video, but you can join the chat, and we encourage you to do that. Share your ideas, your experiences, your challenges with one another. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. The speakers will be keeping an eye on the chat as well. You can pop some questions in the chat. You can also use the Q&A to ask questions, and we'll be keeping an eye on those and weaving them into the discussion as we go along as far as we can. I think the only other thing to say is that if you are a supplier in this space and you've joined the webinar as a kind of attendee, please don't use the chat to pitch your products and services. We've had a couple of people try to do that, and that's not really what the intention is. It's there to share ideas and experiences. So that would be great if you could do that. Okay, I think we're just about set. So with no further ado, I'm going to ask panelists to introduce yourselves. I'll start with Fiona. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what your job is, who you work for, roughly how many people that you're supporting, and so forth?
Absolutely. So good morning, everyone. Lovely to be with you all today. So yes, my name's Fiona McCausland. I'm Head of Health and Wellbeing for Royal Mail Group. I've been with the organisation for about 5 months, actually. So previous to that, worked for NatWest for around about 18 years in a variety of HR roles, but latterly was leading the NatWest Wellbeing Programme, and obviously leading the programme here at Royal Mail. At Royal Mail, we have around about 140,000 people across the UK in a variety of different roles. So, it's definitely some hybrid, but obviously being Royal Mail, the majority of our our workforce are kind of operational, post days, delivery, etc. So yes, a very varied organisation.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Fiona. Ruth, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. I've got a hole being drilled in my ceiling because of a leak. I do apologise.
That's okay, we can't hear it.
I'm from BAM UK and Ireland. I look after workplace wellbeing. We are a construction civil engineering company with just under 7,000 employees within UK and Ireland. My background is HR. I've been working in the wellbeing space for the last full-time for the last 4 years. So a lot of our people are site-based, project-based, obviously being in construction. So we do have quite a mix of working arrangements, but we look after the well-being of all of those. And it's predominantly a male environment, which raises a number of challenges as well.
Yeah, okay. Great, thank you. I'm just saying there's a message from Jessie in the chat about recording the transcript. Don't worry about it, Jessie. We record the webinar. We'll be sharing it with everybody afterwards. You don't need to contact Jessie for the transcript. We can share everything with all the attendees afterwards. So thanks very much for that kind offer, but no need. Thank you for that, Ruth. Vicky, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Vicky Walker. I'm the Group Director of HR for Westfield Health. We're an organisation that provides corporate health and wellbeing solutions across the UK and Europe. I've been with the organisation about 5 years now. Prior to that, all of my career has been in a variety of HR roles within Tesco's, both retail and distribution centres. So, yeah, a variety of HR experience in the last 20-odd plus years.
Fantastic, thank you. So really varied organisation, some similarities, some differences, and I think it's going to be interesting to get different perspectives from all of you as we kind of move along. So my first question to you, and I have got this written down, so forgive me, I'm going to read it, is so we've got let's start with you, Fiona. Are you finding that there is increased demand for personalised wellbeing support, and how does it present itself?
The answer is yes, I guess simply. We've certainly found that throughout the pandemic, I think that for us was probably the turning point. Up until that point, we would have probably that, as you said earlier, Claire, that kind of one size fits all, and that's what we would have there. And I guess what is important to say is I think it's still right that you have a core proposition that's available for everybody. So that's kind of your foundation. But through the pandemic, we certainly found that, of course, everybody's needs were very different, and that was very highlighted during that time and has continued. So we're certainly looking at making sure we've got a really core embedded proposition for our colleagues, and then starting to look at, okay, so actually, where are those areas that we might want to dial up or do something a little bit differently? And some of the things that we're looking at, so that colleague journey, actually, what does it look like when somebody, even before they've joined the organisation, what sort of wellbeing support would somebody need? Because actually, it can be quite stressful starting a new job, for example. Right through all the touch points and start to almost segment what the wellbeing proposition is. I think the other piece I would say is what's really helpful in this space is having what I would call kind of your army on the ground to help you. So for us, it's wellbeing ambassadors. So those are the people who really understand what's going on at a local level and can help us understand actually where do we need to do something that's slightly different. So it's that sort of segmented approach as well. So I think those are the key things. I think the final piece probably worth mentioning is I'm a huge advocate for data. I'm not a data geek, but I'm a huge advocate for data. And I think using data to help inform what you do is really important in this space, not only from a business case perspective. So if you're looking for sign off on anything, actually to have the data is really helpful. But, you get information from your suppliers, kind of internal data, what's happening in the external market. All of that can really help to actually hone in on what are the things that you need to do and perhaps slightly differently. So I think those are probably the areas that I would mention.
Yeah, I'm actually going to throw a question out to the audience because we've got a really lots of people commenting in the audience already. How many of you have got networks of ambassadors, wellbeing ambassadors or champions? Just kind of drop something into the chat as we're going along, because it'd be interesting to see how much that resonates with you. Yes, lots of people. Yes, yeah. Wellbeing working group, not a formal one. Yes, team of 3. Okay. So that's really interesting to see, and I think that, Ruth, that you have ambassadors as well, or champions. I'm not quite sure what you call them.
Yeah, absolutely. So our mental health first aiders, we call them wellbeing champions, but again, just working exactly the same way as Fiona has just described, and there absolutely are ears on the ground. So our approach is broadly similar to Royal Mail, just on a much smaller scale. Everybody does need a different approach, so support is tailored, but even within an employee assistance program, the advice that's provided is always deeply personal, depending on what it is that somebody actually wants. We offer a personalised approach by just continually adding to our knowledge base, and something that we're about to start rolling out is sort of bite-sized learning. So we have a sort of programme of events, one key theme for each month, but we have such huge interest in so many really diverse topics and subjects. We're looking to just supplement that and support that with sort of probably 25-30 minute sessions in between. And we do have people in the business very keen to share their own personal stories and do video logs, so talk about bipolar or alopecia or whatever it might be. So a very, very similar approach. It's very aligned to HR. HR obviously have their ear to the ground in terms of life events. So we have a whole program or a whole package of benefits and support that follows the sort of key life cycle events that people go through. So again, a lot of very generic stuff, but a lot of very, very personalised support available to people, and it's constantly changing.
So you make it personal by having kind of lots of information, lots of different information available, in essence.
Yes, because we just find that the more you talk about things, the more people go, actually, I have experience of that, or I'm struggling with that, or somebody in the family's got that. So it's just continually expanding that knowledge base. We started off with the sort of the stress and the tiredness and the eat better kind of stuff, but now we're getting requests for, can we learn more about self-harming, because that affects a lot of people in one way or another. So it's very much tailoring it to the just the feedback that we get. That's what people want to know about. That's what they want support with. That's what they want to have the confidence and the metaphoric toolkit to be able to deal with on a personal level.
And so you assess what people need, partly by kind of getting feedback from your network of champions, and partly from asking people. I guess the stigma is reduced so much in your organisation, people are more forthcoming with what they're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Fiona, I'm very data driven. I'm always poring over all the reports. One interesting thing that came up last year was the number of people using our EAP for legal advice and support, which I hadn't previously seen. So again, it's, do we think about providing a few more legal-based webinars? But it's feedback. We as with many, particularly larger organisations, we do a lot of surveys. So we get a lot of very, very detailed feedback through that. We get a lot of granular detail with sort of text comments that come through. We try and get evaluation from the webinars and ask people what they would like to hear more about in future webinars. So we get feedback that way. And then just as previously discussed, our network of wellbeing champions, we have sort of forums and sort of top-down and bottom-up communication with them. So always trying to keep our ear to the ground in terms of what people are actually wanting in the business.
Yeah, fantastic. There's a couple of suggestions coming through the chat as well. David Daly has an interactive monthly wellbeing calendar and a quarterly focus on areas such as get active, get talking, get together, and get money savvy. I mean, that's a great way to start to get people engaged, isn't it? But it's this kind of the constant feedback that makes it easier to personalise, I think, and things like tapping into what the feedback that you're getting from the ambassadors or the feedback that you're getting from individuals is really what makes a massive difference when it comes to personalising. Laura's saying, totally agree, good quality data is so useful, and looking at what people need and works rather than what you just want to make assumptions about. So thank you very much about that. Vicky, I wanted to ask you a question as well. How does this compare to your approach at Westfield Health?
Yeah, very, very similar, and I noticed in the chat Jodie mentioned there around pulse surveys, and I think, you know, we're constantly asking for feedback via pulse surveys, wellbeing surveys, via line managers feedback, and just generally having those sort of adult conversations with people. I think it can't be underestimated, the amount of having a good conversation with somebody to find out what actually is going off in the world and what it is they're wanting support with. So really trying to be open to that, but also being realistic that you can't do everything that everybody wants. So I think it's also understanding, as much as you want it to be personalised for everybody, if you've got an organisation such as Royal Mail, you can't create a personalised individual wellbeing approach for everybody, but understanding not one solution will fit all, but giving people an opportunity of a variety of solutions that they can pick and choose from what works well for them, and giving them the autonomy to make those decisions around what works for them, whether it's a webinar, whether it's an EAP guidelines. So I think it's really getting to know your people and understanding that on that level, really.
Yeah, and Jill Duggan's actually just popped in the chat here. We use Westfield Health and are currently investigating their webinars and monthly learning. So you provide all that, so a little plug for you, why not? So yeah, what else would you kind of have to add that? I mean, I'm guessing it's quite difficult to practice. You have to make sure you really practice what you preach, don't you, at Westfield Health?
Yeah, and we're not immune to the same difficulties as other organisations. So, you know, because we provide corporate health and wellbeing, we're expected to be the best at what we do for our own colleagues, and it's really important to me that we practice what we preach. But it doesn't mean to say that we're immune to getting things wrong. You know, we can put on a webinar and only have a handful of people and think, oh, why it's not the content, it's not the delivery, it's just not hitting the spot, maybe it's just not what our people want. So I think don't give up too easily when you perhaps don't get the engagement you want in some of your your webinars or your wellbeing initiatives. It could just be it's not the right thing. So I think understanding that some things will be more popular than others. Some people will be more open to having those conversations with you than others. But absolutely, we do feel that pressure of practicing what we preach. But we're no dissimilar to other organisations. We've still got, for example, an IT team that don't actually like to talk about wellbeing because they'd like to be sat in front of their computer writing code, you know.
Yeah.
It's being realistic around what your colleagues want and need, and not forcing things that I think you can. It's a bit like forced fun at work, isn't it? If forced wellbeing can feel intrusive to some colleagues.
Yeah.
So understanding that.
Yeah, and I'm going to come back onto this a little bit because I know you wanted to talk a little bit about employee experience and stuff as well. We're going to come on to that next, but we've had some really interesting questions in the chat, and I just wanted to drill down a little bit more into the data issue. Somebody's saying, you don't have to name the names or anything, but what external, a lot of people are starting to switch on to the fact they need this data, but they don't really know how to access it. So where are you getting your data? Which external providers? It's EAP. It's where else do you get your data from? Can you answer that, Fiona? I don't mean to put you on the spot with that.
No, you're absolutely fine. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, any suppliers that you have will be able to provide you with data. And I think the other thing is that they also have their networks as well. So very often just sitting down with them to say, actually, we want to look into this space, they can draw on some of the information that they get access to as well. There's a plethora of information. You know, the Office of National Statistics has fantastic data available. Organisations like Deloitte have brilliant wellbeing research that they're doing, and recently, I think last year, produced a great report, which I'm sure we can get a hold of perhaps and send round to everybody. So yeah, I would just say use the contacts. Use contacts like this, the networking forums that you've got on LinkedIn, etc. You know, what I tend to find in the wellbeing space is it's not like at school when everyone's got their arms round and they don't want to share information. It's a very collaborative, and we're very lucky that we work in this environment that actually people really want to share information as much as possible. So definitely use your networks as well.
And somebody else is saying CIPD has great data, which I didn't know.
They do.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Can I just add to that? You know, with all the external providers we have, and EAP being a really good example, they do provide us, it's completely anonymised. as you would expect, but they give us a lot of detail in terms of age profiles, gender breakdown, and the key reasons that people use the EAP, which is why we know that actually 20% of calls last year were legal advice calls, as opposed to being it predominantly counselling support, which is historically what the EAP has been used for. But we get a lot of detailed information from our medical insurance provider, again with the same kind of granular detail. All the external providers we have, they all send through a management information report. And I use that, I aggregate that information, I share it with our board, and actually I share it with the wider business in an annual report at the end of the year, because I think it's really important that everybody in our business knows that actually we are supporting large numbers of people, and out of the sort of near 7,000 that we've got, it's a four-figure number that used our support services in some way last year. And also wellbeing champions, we try to capture the number of conversations that take place. That's not quite as scientific, and we're reliant on people using an app or a Teams form. But again, there are a lot of issues around just monitoring what our wellbeing champions are doing. But it's hugely valuable to know the very large number of people they support across the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, somebody's just popped in there a reference to staff using lots of different channels for communication, and that's just reminded me about a conversation that we were having, Fiona, before, because it's this kind of this engagement aspect of personalisation as well is so important, and how you communicate about the various offerings and not taking a blanket approach. And I guess you've done that with your segmented approach, Fiona, haven't you? Can you just tell us a little bit more about how you approach segmentation, and also the nudge aspect of what you do? Because I've heard about that being used by university, interestingly, when they're communicating with students. So can you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, having a good communication strategy linked to wellbeing is I think it's absolutely crucial. And I'll be really honest, it's not easy sometimes. So, if I think about our, in Royal Mail, actually, of course, we've got a large proportion of people who are out delivering, and it's not easy, to get information. So you do need to think kind of creatively around actually what is the channel that's best going to work for your people, and that sort of multifaceted approach. I would say don't stick to one channel, just try different things, because actually, as we all know, people like to receive information in different ways as well. So it's really great to have something like, we have Workplace, so it's, effectively Facebook for business. I'm sure people on the call will have a similar thing, where it's a very open, collaborative community where you can share information, right through to actually when we've got posties who are out and about and they've got their devices, which are called PDAs, actually we can do nudge messages through to that. So at the right time, and we feel, whether it's based on sentiment or actually maybe it's a particular event, Mental Health Awareness Week, for example, we're able to push those messages out. So just, I think back to what Ruth was saying, just really bite-sized, just those nudges that actually make people stop and think, because we really want people to make those small changes and not to be overwhelmed by the information they're getting.
Yeah, fantastic. And have you brought some of that over from your work at NatWest? Because I know you've actually got a behavioural insights team, haven't you, at NatWest?
We do. Yeah, they were a fantastic team who, behavioural psychologists. So, would share with us, actually, if you want to get your message across, make sure it's, it's 2 or 3 things, and actually use that kind of drip feeding, just nudge to get people to think about it. It's massively impactful.
Okay, that's really, really useful. But a lot of this is transferable, even if you don't have your own behavioural scientists working for you. It's just the key point is to kind of drip feed the information across and make it really relevant, and think about actually how different all the different audiences in your organisation are. Fantastic.
I think as well, Claire, I was just going to add on the back of that, Fiona, I think when we talk about wellbeing and wellbeing strategy, it can feel a bit intimidating. It can feel like it's huge. Yeah. And actually, it's about keeping things simple, keeping things realistic and simple and achievable, really, rather than trying to, climb Everest. Let's just think about, making a few steps forward. So I think sometimes we can be intimidated by the words wellbeing strategy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and in fact, lots of people. Sorry, Ruth, go on.
Sorry. And I was just going to add, that just the whole communication point that Fiona raised is a huge challenge for us. We have a large number of our population who don't readily use the company email, so they're site-based people. They don't have company-issued devices. We've actually really gone back to basics in terms of having little pocket cards for them, having no dedicated wellbeing notice boards, so our wellbeing champions make sure that those boards have the most up-to-date wellbeing information. And we also encourage posters and literature in toilets, which is about as basic as you can get. But we know that people have that 30 seconds of attention, and actually that's a really good place to get messages across, even if it's just sellotaped or blue tacked to a notice board or above a urinal or on the back of the toilet door. That's a really good place to get messages across. So some of it is really simple, really, really simple.
Fantastic. Yeah, and lots of people agree. We use toilet posters, really work well for us. We call it toilet training, somebody's saying. I mean, the only thing is that, I guess a lot of people that responded to our initial survey said their staff are hybrid working. So that's not going to necessarily, I guess some people will be in the office sometimes and they'll see those, but we do have to keep into consideration that it's harder sometimes to communicate with people when they're at home, isn't it? And working. Is there anything any kind of special tips you've got to share around that and how you kind of personalise for people who are hybrid working? Vicky, what about you?
I think it's encouraging managers and team leaders to make those regular check-ins, and I think we can use the hybrid working or the remote working as a barrier, but actually it's a really quick enabler. And even if you you're just dropping somebody a Teams message, hi, how are you, opening those doors for conversations. I think it's that regular check-in. And I know some managers even, write themselves a list at the start of the week to make sure they've checked in with certain people each week. So I think it's just that, I suppose, more forced and planned communication that you would naturally do in the office when you were seeing each other, just sort of that drip feeding conversations either via Teams, via Slack, so whichever sort of digital online platforms you use.
Yeah, Sharon's suggesting that banners on the intranet often work for our home workers, she says. So it's just finding what works for your people, isn't it, I guess, essentially. There was somebody also saying they find it hard to talk to people on site about wellbeing versus people in the office. Fiona and Ruth, I'm guessing that it's about understanding a language that will resonate with those.
Absolutely. I mean, something that we've had a lot of success with is just the wellbeing champions going out on site and having wellbeing conversations. We have a particular safety advisor, somebody who started as safety advisor and then became a full-time wellbeing advisor. But she actually goes out on site and she talks the talk and walks the walk with people on site. And, we do have sites where we have people where English is not their first language. So again, huge challenges there in terms of language and culture, but she's become very skilled at actually having those conversations. And even if people don't want to engage in talking, she plants that seed and she leaves them with the message that, if they do need help at some point in the future, she's always available there to have a chat to. And that really pays dividends. It is just being out there, being visible. It's actually having those conversations and sharing your own personal experiences. As soon as you start talking about any of these issues, people will always go, actually, I've suffered with stress, or I've had time off with anxiety, or something that I had not so long ago. 15 years ago, I had time in the Priory. I had no idea. So people do really share those. When you just share your own personal experience, people do share theirs really, really quickly.
And actually, I was going to ask you about this later, but I'm going to ask you about it now because it seems like a good moment. You've done something which is quite innovative with wellbeing rooms, haven't you? Which I think has initially it helped to engage people on site or to
absolutely yes,
and actually it's super transferable.
I always have to sort of preface this with, I wish it was my idea, but it really wasn't. In fact, it was the safety advisor, now wellbeing advisor, that I was just referring to. So 2019, she identified a need to create a safe space for people to come and have these conversations. So she asked the project director on a big motorway construction site, 300 people, if she could trial a wellbeing room. And the wellbeing room was simply, if you imagine your typical construction sites, just loads and loads of porta cabins all piled up one on top of another. And there was an unloved space in there as a stationary room or something. So with a very modest budget, she was permitted to go off to IKEA and come back with a couple of armchairs, chairs, a sofa, a coffee table, a rug, some pretty pictures, some fairy lights, bookcase, to make it look like an informal sitting room. And what she found was that people would come and talk to her about safety in the first instance. And then when that conversation finished, they would actually say to her, actually, while I'm here, can I talk to you about such and such? And they would then sit down, close the door, fire up the kettle, sit down, have a chat. And she kept an anonymized record, but she kept a record of the number of conversations and the kind of things that were being raised. And it was 70 people over a 3-month period who between them had 210 conversations. Suicide was a huge theme, people feeling suicidal, they'd attempted suicide, they'd got somebody at home feeling suicidal, they'd been bereaved by suicide, they got teenagers self-harming, teenagers being bullied, children being bullied, terminal illness at home, serious gambling addiction, you name it, our folk were dealing with it. It was mostly personal stuff, but it was all personal stuff that was then coming into safety critical roles. So we were able to support, signpost, train, get charities involved, just do all the right things for those people so that the worry that they had was lessened in whatever way it was that we could actually support them. And it was so successful that we won awards for it. And we've been rolling it out to all of our larger sites and offices. And even the smallest site can just have a small space where they can create a wellbeing space, place or garden. And it's paid dividends hundreds of times over. It's been awesome.
Yeah, and really don't need a huge budget for that.
Absolutely not a huge budget. And of course, the stuff that was on that site then went up to the M62, it then went down to the M27, and I believe it's somewhere over in Arundel at the moment on the A27. So actually, it was hugely cost effective.
What do you think of that, Fiona? Have you heard of that before? Have you come
across that? I have. And just probably to build on it, I think, again, back to that hybrid working, what we've tried to do is also create some online safe spaces for people actually who are remote as well. So, some good examples against my previous organisation, but things like we would have bereavement cafes, menopause cafes. We did introduce a mental health cafe, so where people could come in and that sort of psychologically safe environment, whether they wanted to break out into rooms, if they wanted to explore a particular subject. That works particularly well as well. So
and that's all online,
blend, and that's online. It would be like this, a Zoom call or a Teams call, etc. But very clear parameters, and it's really helpful then because you can, as Ruth said, you can bring in experts or charities or whatever into those meetings to sort of help with that conversation as well. So those can work well as well.
And your rooms are manned by champions, aren't they, Ruth? Wellbeing.
They're what? Sorry.
You have a wellbeing champion who's sort of working in the room and
yes, no, yeah. Where we have the wellbeing rooms, I mean, it's not exclusively for the trained mental health first aiders. If somebody wanted to have a wellbeing chat with their line manager or just with a colleague, it's just to have the conversation. But predominantly the conversations are led with our mental health first aiders, or as I say, we call them wellbeing champions. But it's for anybody to have a conversation. And the rooms can be used as prayer rooms. They can be used if somebody's not feeling very well. But we have created them as wellbeing rooms. So, sometimes people will work in there for an hour a week and just have a kind of drop-in type session. Other times people are there for it's just used as and when. So they are really, really flexible.
Fantastic, thank you. Lots and lots of questions coming through. We will get to more of those shortly, but I just wanted to kind of move the discussion on a little bit to because we've talked a little bit about the employee experience and kind of when it's best to reach out to people. Do you talk to them in terms of life stages, or should you talk to them in relation to their generation, or should it be related to their employee journey sort of through the company? So Fiona, what's your take on that?
So I think in an ideal world, and probably what we are moving to is all of those things. A truly personalised wellbeing proposition will have wellbeing embedded, whether it's whether it is those journeys or it's life stages, etc. So I think, to Vicky's point earlier, that can feel overwhelming to kind of look at that. So just to almost choose, which is where we are at the moment, is actually what are the one or two areas that we might want to focus on, and then we'll build up from there. So a good example for us is around induction. Actually, what does it feel like when you join Royal Mail? And let's make sure that that well-being process is, or proposition is really embedded into it. So I think it's quite a long journey, excuse the pun, that you kind of go on with this. But for me, it's very much embedded at every point, whether it's a life moment or a work event, etc.
And you mentioned to us before that wellbeing is actually within the employee experience team at Royal Mail Group.
It is, yes. Yeah. So we sit in employee, and I've worked in wellbeing a while now, and we've moved in. I've been in various different areas, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but wellbeing sits. It feels like I'm home at the moment, if that makes sense. So wellbeing feels naturally good in terms of that employee experience team. So sit alongside our engagement team, who work on communications, our recognition colleagues. But what we've actually done is we've also developed a kind of broader people group where we've got our performance, our talent, our learning team, leadership. We've all come together because actually what we found is that actually everybody's working on kind of those colleague journeys and moments that matter.
Right.
So there's a danger of duplication. So actually we've come together to identify that. So we're all working on it, kind of a bit of a squad team, as we're calling it, which is hugely helpful as well.
And ultimately how you embed this across the organisation, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely.
How does that compare, Vicky, to kind of what your thinking is on this and how you approach this?
Yeah, very similar. For me, it's the golden thread that goes right from recruitment right through to life events. And I think if you don't do it that way and you just look at the life event, you haven't always necessarily got the trust from employees that then want to talk to you when they really need that wellbeing support. They perhaps haven't got the trust or the feeling that they can, because they're not sure if wellbeing's a thing and should you do it. So I think having it right from application and understanding that in our job specs that wellbeing is important to us and it's important to our people right the way through helps it become that sort of golden thread that feeds throughout the employee experience. So I don't think it's something that can be done as an aside. It's got to be part of and embedded within.
And also part of job design, I think that's really, really crucial thing that, we're hearing that more and more. People like BITC, CIPD, Health and Safety Executive, they're all urging employers now to think actually about how they might be creating, the conditions for poor mental health within their organisations, just through simple things like job structure, whether you're recruiting the right people, that kind of thing. Would you agree with that, Vicky?
Yeah, I think what you can't do is put on webinars and think that that's your answer and your solution around wellbeing. If somebody's job is too big, or they don't understand their objectives, or they don't understand what they're here to deliver, then you're trying to ask them to come and participate in some wellbeing activity. I think it has to start with the basic. It has to start with what is it we're expecting this employee to do, and in what environment, what's the workload, what's the pressures. So I think really understanding that sort of wellbeing is part of everything, rather than it's an add-on and it's something that you can do to tick a box. I think long gone are the things where you can do, we do wellbeing because we do free fruit. It's so much more than that, and it's so much more complicated. And I think what we do is try and weave that throughout the employee experience.
Yeah, that sounds good. What about you, Ruth? I mean, I know you were saying that a lot of the problems, interestingly, are coming from outside the workplace. But do you have kind of measures in place also to look at how you're adapting ways of working to make sure that they're not sort of putting pressure on people?
We did a work-life balance webinar on Monday, and we did that because we're getting a lot of feedback through surveys that work-related stress, long hours working away from home, long commuting times, complete lack of work-life balance were really big issues. And the themes there were massive, and we couldn't actually answer all the queries that people were presenting. Construction is a difficult industry in that projects are based where our clients want us to be working. it all comes down to managers and leaders. It's encouraging individuals to have those conversations with their managers. We have measures in place through our review scheme, through training, through our management and leadership programs to enable managers to have these conversations, but they do need to be two-way conversations. Flexible working being a really key part of that. A lot of the feedback we had was flexible working is not that flexible. So it was very, being applied in an inconsistent way. So again, it was directing people to have those conversations with their line manager in the first instance, with support from HR if necessary. We're also embarking on looking at work-related stress risk assessments, because I think that will address a lot of the job design, the core 6 management standards that HSE have. So I think some of those issues will be addressed as we start seeing the feedback through doing work-related risk assessments. But we know that a huge amount of the stress that people have in their lives is personal stuff, and often it's just work that's kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back. So it is really hard sometimes trying to separate it. So we provide all the support we can for the personal stuff. We're beginning to address the work-related stuff. So hopefully later in the year, our people will be in a much better place to be able to confidently have those conversations and make the necessary change to actually keep them well. And to get that work-life balance or work-life harmony, as I heard it referred to a couple of weeks ago. The feedback on the call from Monday, it wasn't feeling that harmonious, I have to be honest. But that's why we ask the questions. It's no good hiding away from the really, really difficult issues, and I think that is a difficult issue when it's hours and workloads. Most businesses expect people to do more with less, and that really is difficult and doesn't sit particularly well with well-being.
Yeah, exactly.
We have to manage it as best we can.
And somebody else is suggesting risk assessments, and in fact, I've heard that I think they're mandatory now in Australia for companies with over 50 employees.
To be honest, they have actually been mandatory. If you look at the 1999 regulations, they've been mandatory for the last 24 years in the UK. It's just people haven't been doing them.
Right.
HSE haven't been enforcing it, but actually there has been an obligation to do work-related stress risk assessments.
Yeah, it's the psychosocial risk assessment that's mandatory now in Australia. Anyway, we've got lots. Thank you so much for that. That's really, really helpful. I'm just going to ask, we're going to move on to questions around where family support fits into the equation in a moment. But we've got lots of questions, so I just wanted to get through a couple of them now. We've had difficulty, somebody says, an anonymous attendee in the questions. We've had difficulty providing 15-minute bite-sized sessions, which is really what we need for our call centre scheduled staff. Do you think that this is trying to condense things too much? Ruth mentioned 25 minutes as bite-sized. Just a quick fire answer. Ruth, what do you think?
I guess it depends what they're trying to address. We're trying to address particular conditions where it's more detailed, things like stress and anxiety. I think it does need to, that can't necessarily be dealt with as a really tiny bite-sized thing. Bite-sized, you can only offer really top tips and the key issues surrounding particular conditions. So I think you need to pick out what are the ones that are really important to people and the ones that will really make a difference, and perhaps look at that in a bit more detail.
Ruth, Fiona, what would you add to that?
Yeah, so I totally agree with what Ruth's saying there. When we were at NatWest, we produced a number of videos actually, rather than sort of webinars in this space. So, 8-minute videos, which almost bring a persona to life that people can relate to. That can be hugely impactful. So I'd maybe suggest just thinking about, actually, does it need to be a webinar, or are there some other channels that you can maybe use to get the same message across?
Yeah. So, but generally, it's kind of less is more for people these days.
Keep
at least
simple.
To grab their attention to start off with.
Yeah. And I think then you can always follow it up with the signposting, can't you? I think if that is your limit, 15 minutes, then try and do something in that time rather than nothing.
Yeah.
And at least try and signpost people.
Yeah, fantastic. And then another question here. How do you approach what you do differently for employees who aren't engaged in wellbeing? Vicky, I think it was Ruth, you mentioned the IT team who aren't interested, or was it Vicky? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it was me. I think it's just talking to people, so and try not to force it. So there will be a topic that actually they'll think, oh, I'm interested in that, and that you might only get one topic out of your 12. Somebody mentioned the health calendar there. So I think it's about being patient with people that aren't necessarily wanting to talk about it, because there'll be something that will resonate with them, and they will get engaged if it's something that really means something to them that they want to do. So sometimes I know we're going to come on to about the wider family equation, but sometimes some people will relate to something more because it impacts their family or their outside their wider network rather than just themselves as well.
Yeah, no.
And I think the whole asking twice, where you've got people who aren't engaging, is just asking, how are you really, and explaining to them why you're concerned about them if you are concerned, and just following it up. That's hugely powerful. So even though you might get the pushback the first time, when you ask them the next day or the next week, you are much more likely to get somebody to say, yeah, actually, can I just have a chat to you about such and such?
And so somebody told me once, actually, if you start a conversation about sleep, you say, how did you sleep last night? How are you sleeping at the moment? That's something that people are actually relatively happy to talk about and comfortable to talk about. And it opens up a whole other conversation potentially. Fiona, have you got any other tips?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think back to what I was saying earlier, I can think of groups of people where well-being is not at the top of their agenda, or and actually, when you start to build, I'll go back to that word personas, if you can capture what does a typical person in that team do on a day-to-day basis, and start to showcase how well-being could fit into that, actually that can be hugely impactful. So if people can resonate with what they're seeing and think, oh, okay, actually, that can be helpful. And I think to the point earlier as well around bringing your managers on that journey with you. So get them involved, because they're the ones that are going to have, really good discussions. I think I saw in the chat there's someone asking about wellness action plans, which are a fantastic tool to help have those conversations. Something we've actually just about to roll out in Royal Mail is that sort of wellbeing check-in alongside the action plan, so that managers have that tool to have a good conversation, and then do something on the back of it. So I would recommend the action plans through Mind if people haven't had a chance to look at them.
Yeah, I was going to ask if they were the Mind ones that you were talking about. Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. Again, we've got lots more questions, and don't worry, everybody. I am keeping an eye on the chat. We won't be able to get to all of them, but I have got some more in mind that I've making a note on my notebook about. But I just wanted to move on to the third part of our discussion, which is around sort of family support, and sort of how you support, what kind of wider family support you can offer realistically. It seems that employers are expecting this. We've heard this more and more. Fiona, what are you doing at Royal Mail? What can you realistically offer?
Yeah, and I think this is a really big area for us to think about going forward. It is not just about the individual. I think, as Vicky said there, quite often the wellbeing issues that people are facing are family related or outside of the work environment. So for us, it's really important where we can to offer broader support. So it's that holistic view to wellbeing. So you as a person, yes, you come to work, but you as a person, actually, we want to look after the whole of you. So just some examples. We've recently launched an online GP service and physiotherapy, all of which is also available to family members. We have mental health consultations, which can also be offered out to family members as well. So I guess the answer is, where we can, we will absolutely make sure that we can offer we can offer out. Some things you can't for various reasons, but actually quite a lot of the time, most wellbeing support can be offered out. And giving people something physical or virtual that they can go away and have a conversation with their family can be quite helpful as well. So again, we're just about to issue colleagues with a booklet. Sounds simple, a booklet, but it's for you and your family, so they can sit down and have those conversations, because it can be quite difficult. They're difficult to have at work, but actually wellbeing conversations can be quite difficult to have with people that you love as well. So anything we can do to kind of help that is definitely within our gift to do, I think.
But you it sounds like you've got a big budget to do that. Do you?
No.
Okay.
No, certainly not. And I think that's a key message. To do a lot of these things, you actually don't need a big budget in the wellbeing space. There is so much support that's out there. And the wellness, actually, that's a good example. When you go on to places like like Mind and Mental Health UK, there's a plethora of support that's available. So I would say you do not need a big budget at all, and no, we certainly do not have one.
Ruth, how does that compare to what you're doing?
Yeah, but very similar. The EAP that we have, family can use it, and we do know that dependents use it. Same with our medical insurance. We have on occasions actually paid privately, where for whatever reason we haven't been able to access the very specific nature of counselling or therapy that's needed, whether it's for an employee or a dependent. We will just pay for that privately. So we have no difficulty supporting the wider family. We have had particular webinars on child and adolescent mental health. We did that particularly in the pandemic because there was a huge interest in that for all the obvious reasons. And we have, I have seen, although we haven't actually had, we have had it within our organisation. We have an external company providing a lot of family-based support. So parental support, fertility, and particularly menopause, and they've actually had evening webinars. So again, they are very much designed so that people can sit at home and watch them with their partner or their children, depending on what the subject matter is. So again, it's just being as flexible as we possibly can. You know, again, for organisations who don't have EAPs or medical insurance, organisations such as the NHS, in addition to the ones we've already mentioned, they have some brilliant stuff. Just print stuff off the NHS website on child and adolescent mental health. You know, that is very easy to share with people, and supports the wider family.
Yeah, thank you. And Vicky, what about you? What would you have to add to this, particularly kind of for people? Maybe there was a question from a small business in the chat earlier on. They said they've got an EAP, but they don't, you know, they want to manage to do everything else really on a shoestring. What would you suggest? Are you finding that you're getting increased demand for sort of support of the wider family as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's becoming a bit of an expectation, but I think remembering that your employees have got to look after themselves before they can look after the wider family. So, you know, the old aeroplane analogy, looking after themselves before they try and help other people. And I think if you can do as much support as you can for that individual as an employee first and foremost, then you would hope that either looking after them would then give them the more headspace to be able to support their family around them. But equally, if you've given them information or signposted them somewhere that they feel able that they can share that as well. I think especially if you can't, you know, give them access to GPs, etc. It's around how can you help the employee to then help their family first and foremost. Yeah, I think some of the topics will always be able to be relatable, and it's just trying to encourage the employees to share that then when they get home. I think the gift of time is always the easiest thing. I think when people feel that pressure outside with family issues, the gift of time that an employee can give that, whether that's, you know, not feeling guilty to take a longer lunch break or finishing a little bit early to be able to accommodate some family issues. I think that goes such a long way, and I wouldn't underestimate the impact that would have for colleagues in the organisation.
And you've actually empowered your line managers to kind of use their discretion when they can give that, haven't you? I think. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, our line managers know their teams the best, so they can see whether it's workload or family pressures. They have that empowerment to say, well, actually, log off right now. Go get yourself a walk and some headspace, and then come back. Or do you need to work differently this week? Do you need to work more condensed working weeks? And absolutely trying to empower our line managers to be able to do that where we can. We still have call centres that have got to be manned and gyms that have got to be manned as well. So it's sometimes you can't always give that flexibility, but I think it's about being honest with those conversations and offering what you can offer.
Yeah, fantastic.
I would just mention some free online training that's available at smaller companies. I'm sure be aware of ACAS, but they have a lot of free online training. They have a really good mental health course that's available for everybody. And there's an organisation called the Zero Suicide Alliance, which is actually an NHS produced online learning about suicide awareness and prevention. And there's some fantastic free resource there that anybody can use.
Fantastic. There's actually Helen has just popped a question in there. And how do you ensure your initiatives are inclusive across all protected characteristics? I mean, that I think is a real challenge. Maybe that's a topic for another webinar. Are any of you able to answer that briefly?
I would say it's a topic for another webinar, but I would say talk to your people, ask how they would want to feel more included. I think be open. You don't always know things. So yeah, I think it's definitely a topic for another webinar.
Okay. Right, we'll make a note about that one, but it is definitely a hot topic with the people that we're talking to as well, and so important as well. People don't feel singled out. That seems to be what I hear. It's like you put all this stuff on for people, but actually, people don't want to be referred to in that way necessarily. So you've got to sort of find a way of engaging them as well. We're nearly out of time, but I've got some more questions that have come through. A couple that I particularly wanted to ask you. One was around how you measure the ROI of personalised wellbeing. That's a tricky one. That's come through the chat. Fiona, are you able to measure ROI?
It's a really interesting question, and I think it's one of those things that we're all grappling with a little bit, to be honest. So I guess, can you measure it? You can measure, certainly you can measure usage and all the various things that you have very simply. What we've introduced to kind of help in this area is a wellbeing index into our, like we talked earlier about surveys, etc. So we have a suite of questions now. We used to ask 1 or 2 questions in the wellbeing space, but we have a suite that cover kind of what I would say the 4 pillars of well-being, kind of financial, social, physical, mental health, etc. And we ask these all the way along. So in addition to that, we're also then looking at every single intervention we put in and saying, how are we going to measure this? And if we can't measure it, let's just really question ourselves as to actually, is it the right thing to be doing? So I think there's a lot more as a community we can do in this space. There was also a piece of work we did back in NatWest where we took the wellness barrier that Mercer's produced. Again, we'll find the link. But the wellness barrier kind of helps you to understand where people are in the wellness journey, and you can actually start to kind of plot where your intervention sits on it, and that's quite a useful tool as well. So I think there are things out there, but there's no one single thing yet that somebody has developed that would answer that, I would say.
But increasingly, it's important, what you're saying, is to have that front of mind,
100%.
even when you're kind of devising what interventions you put in place.
It's really important to know the number of people that you're supporting, which is where the data comes in. And there is actually an association of employee assistance program providers, and they do have a very basic ROI online tool that anybody can use. I can't remember off the top of my head what data goes in there, but again, we mentioned the Deloitte report, the sort of ROI stuff and business risks of not doing wellbeing well. We do focus very much on that in terms of if we didn't do it, what it might cost us. So we do try and quantify it. We know how many people leave our business because of wellbeing issues, because of the exit interviews we do, and it's really, when the CIPD suggests it's £30,000 plus per employee that you lose, you don't need to lose too many, and that's a very significant amount of money. Just that on its own is quite a powerful number.
Yeah, and that's sort of across the board wellbeing, though, rather than personalised wellbeing, would you say?
Yes, true. Yeah. It is. Yes, that would be general wellbeing.
Yeah.
Often work-life balance stuff.
Yes, exactly. And Vicky, anything to add to that?
I think nothing more really to add to that. I do think that in terms of measurements, intuitive, we know that happier, healthier people perform better at work. So, and I know it's really hard to then describe that and measure that. It's qualitative data sometimes rather than quantitative, which it doesn't always sit well when you're asking for budgets, etc. So, I think it is a hard one to answer, but it's something you should always keep it in the back of your mind. Yeah,
no, definitely. We're just nearly out of time, and there was a really great question about champions, so I think I'll pick that up with you all later, and perhaps we'll do another webinar on champions again. But one last sort of takeaway from you all. What one thing would you like the audience to take away from the chat? Vicky, what would you like the audience to take away?
I'd say don't be frightened by wellbeing. Do something. It's better than doing nothing. And seek support and ask your colleagues what it is that means most to them.
Fantastic. Ruth, what one thing would you add?
Again, I think just keep it simple. We can really easily overcomplicate things. Keep it simple, because you can make a difference and everybody can make a difference.
Well, love that, of course. And Fiona, what one key takeaway, particularly perhaps around the personalised approach?
Yeah,
one
absolutely.
slide for everybody, by the way, so hang on until I put the last slide up.
So I think you don't need a big budget. You use the free resources that are there, and then just start to think about actually what are the 1 or 2 areas, those moments that matter, that you could start to focus in on, that brings it a bit more personal.
Fantastic. Laura, could you pop up that last slide, please? Hopefully she can. Okay, there's just some contact details. If you wanted to contact Westfield Health for a wellbeing consultation, free wellbeing consultation, got the email addresses there. I just wanted to say thank you so much, everybody. It's just been, first of all, an amazing audience. Wow, just the amount of discussion going on there, and lots of tips shared. And we will be sharing the anonymised chat transcripts as well, and links to the various resources that have been referred to, with the downloadable PDF, which is alongside the recording. So we'll be sending everybody an email with those links after the webinar. Thank you so much to the panel. What amazing panel members, so much knowledge. I just feel so honoured to have you all with me today. And thank you, Westfield Health, for your sponsoring this and for making it all possible. So thank you very much, everybody. Wonderful webinar, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Bye.